Okay, well, let's go ahead and start. Again, I'm Brian Bradley. I'm Associate Director at the Center for Teaching and Learning, and my focus is on assessment. And so here we are with a new world to navigate in terms of learning, and especially while we're midstream in the semester, kind of wrapping things up actually with just a few weeks left. I can imagine the challenge that you're facing to move things into an online environment in a way that's effective for you and especially meaningful for your students. As we start this discussion, I just want to highlight a few things that I've heard from administration, folks that the Center for Teaching and Learning and Testing Center that we all report up to all the way up through President Worthen. And what I'm hearing is the message that the students are at the heart of all we're doing, and that we need to remember that they are very anxious to know that they can still succeed in your courses. They're anxious over a number of things, obviously, but where they come in and out of your life and you come in and out of their life, this is what their anxiousness is all about, if they can still succeed in navigating through the rest of your course. So I'm also hearing the council to remember to communicate frequently and clearly to reassure your students that under these new circumstances, they can be successful. And with that, the administration encouraging us, the faculty and support family here at BYU, to approach exams and other assessments in novel ways. That's okay. So there's a lot of leeway that is being allowed here in assessing student learning as we navigate through the rest of this semester, especially. And so we're trying at CTL to make sure we have all of our resources available, all of our experience and ideas and those things to help you move forward. And so our topic for today is actually been suggested by faculty as these situations have from last week, and the idea of moving online. What do we do about test integrity? There's a big concern about students doing their own work and showing their own work for assessments, and how do we navigate through that where we can't right now proctor. And so we've got some ideas and things that can help move this forward. But so this is my learning outcome for our session here. The webinar will promote effective remote learning assessments that go beyond rote memory. And so the key word here is promote. I'm advocating, I'm putting forward ideas for you, but you are the ones in the driver's seat for what you do for your courses and for your students. So I'm just promoting some effective techniques and ideas for assessing in this new environment. You'll learn how to design effective assessment experiences that do not require proctoring and build on the desired outcomes of your course. In addition, ideas will be provided for reducing the potential of unprincipled test taking. That's the polite way of saying cheating. We don't want students to do things that they might be tempted to do, and so we can't prevent all of it, just like we can't prevent people from abusing the HOV lane on the freeway. It's going to happen, but we can do a number of things to discourage them from doing that and encouraging them for interacting with their assessments in correct ways. So what I'm doing is just guidelines. It's not rules or things that you have to do, but things that we'd like you to think about. As we think about unprincipled test taking in an online environment, this set of 4 items are pretty much what students do as they're tempted. They might be tempted to look up answers. They may be tempted to discuss questions with each other, or even sharing questions online, or copying questions and storing them for future reference. And so those are just 4 things, and you may have other items that that you would add to this list, but I think this encapsulates a lot of what we see in online behavior with students. So I'd like to start out with just the idea that a lot of times students don't really understand the appropriate testing behavior, because there are a number of things, activities and things where they are collaborating with each other. They're talking about something that you've presented to them, a question that you've given. And so in one sense, they do collaborate, and they may not understand. And I've seen it. At first I was skeptical of this thought, but I've seen it enough as in my field in assessment that you can have honest students who just don't understand that in certain circumstances, questions need to be protected so that they can be fair to everyone who's going to see that question and interact in assessment in the same way. So I'm just going to read this very quickly. And I'd like you to think about yourselves and that you can communicate this to your students and make that expectation clear. Instructors must specifically define their expectations of ethical behavior to their students. In addition, instructors should explain why these expectations are important in terms of honesty, fairness, and the integrity of the assessment and student scores. Many honest students do not necessarily understand, in some cases, sharing test questions and answers compromise exams and their results. These students are used to collaborating with their peers. They're used to seeking and providing help in a variety of learning activities, including formative assessments. It is not surprising that many of them do not understand that midterms, finals, and other summative assessments contain questions that must not be shared or discussed. So that is something that you can do right up front to make sure your definition of ethical behavior with your exams is understood by your students. So let's move forward with planning the assessment. And this graph here, this chart is Bloom's taxonomy of cognition, going from the lowest level of remember all the way up to the higher level of create things. And so as you're looking at what you want students to be able to do or show that they know, that you can use this as a guide to really focus on the higher levels. I imagine in most of your courses, you are teaching students to function at these higher levels, like apply, analyze, or evaluate. And in many cases, you're having them create things. So the assessments that you create for them should be aligned with what you're trying to have them learn and do. On the next slide, we take Bloom's taxonomy and we've placed possible verbs of what you want your students to do cognitively or with their thinking skills. And so you can see, if we look at the apply column, the verbs there would be apply, practice, employ, going down the illustrate, show, report, collect, dramatize. And let's look at the analyze column where you have analyze, dissect, going down, discriminate, distinguish, survey, compare, contrast, those kind of things that that you can do. So that's just a guide that if that's where your focus is with your students and their learning, it should also be your focus on the assessments that you have. So this is a handy guide to use, and we'll be making this available online so you can get to these slides and see this and work with this as you wish. Are there any questions so far as we go? Okay, this. So if we are looking at higher level cognition, analyze, apply, up in those areas, I would consider, especially in an online environment, go ahead, consider open book notes, internet access, and make that okay with your questions. For example, in a lot of in my prior life, prior to coming to BYU, I was working for a number of years in the corporate training arena, where we were building certification programs, professional certification programs for high tech. And this was very high level thinking that these people had to do. And part of their high level thinking was access to information, access to tools like formulas and tables and things that were in text or textbooks or reference manuals. And so we realized that we needed to have open book. We needed to provide resources for them to function at the analyze level, because that's what they were doing on the job in their professions. They were working, they were analyzing things and developing and evaluating things. And they needed, instead of memorizing tables and passing an exam on what the tables stated, they actually used the tables in order to make decisions and apply their skills. And so I would just consider allowing that. I know in the statistics department, a number of the courses actually supply in their exams the formula sheets and references that students can look up in order to answer the higher level tasks that they're given. So on the third bullet here, set time limits on the exam. This is one of the best ways to keep students focused on the exam and then doing their own work. If they don't have time to collaborate, if they don't have time to copy and paste the material somewhere else, they just got to stay focused, read the question, answer it, get through it, and then move on. This helps them keep that focus. And the fourth bullet, use different but equivalent questions or problems to offset inappropriate collaboration. This is very effective for very complex questions that students might memorize and then talk about with each other after they're finished. And so as they talk about questions, each student will be seeing a different question text, but they'd be answering a similar they'd be actually doing a similar skill in answering the question. And so the questions are equivalent but different. And so it makes it more difficult for them to collaborate or speak about it with each other. And then just the focus on the cognitive tasks that students need to be able to do. What is the task? What's the knowledge and skill that they need to be able to apply that is aligned with your learning outcome and what you've been teaching and working with them for. And then the last one is multiple choice questions can be written at higher levels of cognition. Most of the time we see multiple choice questions that are more of the remember or understand level, things that they've memorized, but we can construct multiple choice questions that go at the higher level. And I have this example that kind of illustrates that. It's a history example, and it's talking, so this part here, I don't know if you can see my pointer, but the top part, we call it the question stem. So this gives the student all the information they really need to absorb to answer what we're asking them to do cognitively. And so in this case, talk about the Battle of Gettysburg climaxed on the third day, and the Confederates were defeated. And then we talk about each of the statements below, the A, B, and C, are factors that contributed to the Union Army's victory. Which of the statement indicates the strongest reason for the outcome of the battle? So this is, as you can see, way beyond memorization. It's beyond understanding. We're asking them to actually analyze these statements, evaluate them, and then come up with the strongest reason. And so what's interesting about this question is each of these statements is true. These actually happened, but we're wanting the students to evaluate them and determine which statement is the strongest reason for the Union's victory at Gettysburg. So, so this is just an idea, something for you to think about in your own work. As you can tell, this question is a challenge to write. It's a challenge to write well at the higher levels. And so as such, you want to protect it. You don't want this to get out there. You put a lot of work in this. And so you want to make sure you protect it as long as you can. And so what is recommended is that you create a number of these questions, but you don't show them all at once or all to the same student, to the same group of students. You put them in different forms, and you can have them look at the forms. They would each see different questions as they go, but be answering and be doing the same cognitive task.
Brian, I have a question.
Yes, please.
So if you were to give different sets of questions to different students, wouldn't you need some kind of psychometric data to know that they're really equivalent?
In a perfect world, yes.
Yeah.
And that's true. In the case, in working with this, with the constraints that we have right now, I recommend that after the results come in, you compare students across the board. So this question, I would classify it loosely as, okay, the Battle of Gettysburg, reasons for the Union's victory, that kind of, and I would maybe ask several questions that would fall in that same category across different students. I would compare those individual scores with each other. And if there's a demonstrated difference, if this question that you're reading now worked way better with the students that saw it than my other students, then I would go back and I'd make some sort of adjustment in the score to level that back out.
Okay, thanks.
So yeah, and that's the challenge here. We want to protect these questions so we can reuse them, or let the students have at it with this one and realize we're just going to have to come up with new questions next time. So that's the give and take, or that we have with this kind of situation.
Okay.
But yeah, thank you for that. Okay, so for these alternatives for administering current multiple choice true false type assessments, here's what I'd recommend, especially in the short term of you're bringing your courses online in online fashion right now. Here's some things that you can do that won't take too much work, because you already have a current multiple choice exam that you're using. First of all, set the time limit. Then the other things I have on this list, you can use one or more than one, or mix or match some of these, but these are just some possible things you can do that I'd like you to think about. You can divide your exam, take one exam, divide it into two or more shorter exams. And you can actually administer, if you divide it into two exams, you could just break it and administer it at two different times in your course in some sort of sequence that you decide. Or you could divide the exam into two or more equivalent forms. So you would split your exam into two equal forms, and as a student comes in to take the test online, they wouldn't know which form they were getting. So it would just be, and so they wouldn't know if they're going to be, so if they were to talk about it, they wouldn't know if whoever they're talking with had the same form. And within that, you can, within Learning Suite, I know, and I believe with Canvas as well, you can randomize the order of questions and the order of the answer options. So they would not be seeing, they can't say, oh, what'd you get on that fourth question? You know, did you understand what was being asked there? And they wouldn't even be talking about the same question because they were randomly ordered. And then creating an item bank. That's where you can store questions that you can then draw from. The system will pull questions in from an item bank. And with the item banking concept, you can also select and modify item questions that come with your textbook. A lot of textbooks provide test questions with their material. The only thing I would emphasize here on that is would want to select the questions that apply to what you've been teaching and also edit them to match up with what you've been teaching. I frown on the practice of just using item bank questions that come from a textbook without really looking through them and validating them with what you've been teaching. And then another option would be to convert multiple choice questions into short answer questions. I'm going to go back to this question about the Gettysburg battle, and we could convert this into a question that will be asking for the students to produce the correct answer. We just say, what was the strong, identify, and explain the strongest reason for the Union's victory at Gettysburg. And you'd be looking for whichever is the correct answer here. You have a rubric for it, but just have them generate that answer. And so that would be another alternative to do. So as we're talking about setting the time limits, the basic rule of thumb in doing that is to plan for a time 2 to 3 times longer than it would take you to complete the assessment. Okay, so if you were to sit down and you just go through your own assessment and answer it, the students will probably take 2 or 3 times longer. That's just a rule of thumb. Now, students who have exceptions from University Accessibility Center, you would need to give them more time, whatever their exception is. If they need double time or triple, whatever their exception allows, then you can do that individually in Learning Suite. Now, another rule of thumb is the longer an exam is, especially online, the more students will be tempted to do inappropriate things. And so the shorter and more frequent is really the rule of thumb for online assessments. And then dividing it into shorter exams, like I said before, just you can determine how long you want the exam to be. If there are 2 shorter exams out of the one, you can just administer them sequentially in the course. And then I can't emphasize enough the importance of feedback and scores being returned to students just as quickly as possible. And if you're doing equivalent forms, the idea is to split the exam into equivalent in terms of the concept that you are testing, and hopefully on the difficulty. Christopher was saying, what if one question doesn't work as well as another? And so that is important. So as best you can, try to match them up in difficulty. And then on the back end, as you're evaluating these exams, how your students did on the forms, you can see pretty clearly through the statistics that are given in the Learning Suite exams section. You can see pretty quickly if the forms are not consistent with each other, and then you would need to make some adjustments as you see fit to bring them in line. And then the last one, if you wanted a third form, so you have 2 split forms. If you wanted a third form, you could actually sample from the new Form A and the new Form B, combine them into a third form, and that would just give you 3 fairly equivalent forms to use. So when your students would come in to take the exam, they wouldn't know which one they're getting, and you spread out the exposure of your questions. And then I talked about randomizing the order of questions and the options. The second bullet here, especially on longer exams, there is a documented effect of test fatigue that happens. Often we see the last several questions on an exam do more poorly, return more poor statistics than the earlier questions, and a lot of that can be just the test fatigue. Students just want to get it done and get it over with and move on, and they perform more poorly. So by randomizing the order of your questions, that takes away that effect because the last 3 questions for one student won't be the same as the last 3 questions for another. So, and then item banking, it's a very good strategy where you pull questions from an item bank. Learning Suite handles that rather effectively. And so you can experiment with that or talk to your consultant or myself and we can work with you on that. This is just a screen capture in Learning Suite of a new question. And as I pulled it up, I was identifying the question type, and so you have options, true, false, multiple choice, all the way down to calculated. Hotspot's an interesting one. You could have an image on the screen, and you could ask students to click on the image that is blue, or whatever you want students to be able to identify, or if it's like an anatomy or geography or something, you can set up the question where students will have to click on what the correct area of that image would be. Excuse me. Now the scoring and feedback, this is where the anxiety meets the road as far as students are concerned. And they just want to know how they're doing, what they can do to improve. And so this works for large or small classes to use rubrics for scoring and the feedback. And when you're giving feedback, whether individually or to the group, focus on the main things that you need to reinforce in order to enhance student learning and their future performance. The next bullet, to protect your exams, do not show them to students. Instead, focus on the concepts and skills they did well on and what they need to improve. So what I mean here is, well, we would do this in professional certification exams where we would generate a report after someone had taken an exam. We had the exams linked to their outcomes or the content area that they covered. And we could just give a report, say, okay, you did very well on this set of concepts and skills, and you're right where you need to be in that area. On skills E through J, you didn't do very well, and you need to do improvements. We recommend that you go read these things or get this type of experience, work on these other skills, and that will help you get what you need for those objectives. And that worked very well. The people taking the exams said, hey, this is very helpful, and they didn't balk or say, well, I want to see that I scored right or that you got what I put down. Where they want to nitpick and argue about the actual questions. You just say, I'm not showing the questions. We're going to use them again for other exams. And so, but this is the feedback I'm giving you. And in most cases, it's effective and appreciated, especially because it's focused right in on the skills, not the question. And students will appreciate that. And then try to communicate to your students in a variety of ways, including written, video, and other ways that you would come up with. Digital dialogue within the Learning Suite set of tools is a very efficient tool for this. Any questions so far as we're?
Thanks.
Okay. And again, what I'm sharing is just guidelines. As I'm doing all the talking here, I know you're thinking. I know you're pondering the things that you need to have ready for your students, and you've already spent the last few days going over that in your own minds. And again, I'm just re-showing the same slide I showed at the beginning. The students are at the heart of all we're doing, and this last bullet here, the administration is encouraging us to approach the exams and other assessments in novel ways. And so I just encourage you to think over these things, especially in areas of reassuring. It's the students' comfort in knowing that they can still succeed, and knowing that you're there to guide in that as they navigate through all of the things in their lives, including our course. And so I hope this was helpful for you. We have more time in the hour. Do you have any questions at all for me? That is there anything you were hoping to get from this that I haven't addressed?
Brian, I have just one quick question.
Yes.
Does the university have a license to use Proctorio within Canvas?
It is coming.
But we don't have it just yet.
We don't have it just
Okay.
yet. There are some complications with the license, as far as I understand, that are, but there, as far as online proctoring is concerned, we are looking at a lot of different options. So I think we'll be hearing more about that in another week or so.
Okay, but in the short term, we shouldn't plan on it.
I wouldn't plan on it in the short term, no.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Thanks, Brian.
Yeah, thanks. Good to see you, Blaine.
Yeah, very helpful. Really appreciate this session.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.
All right.